Hi, I'm Isadora Hare. I worked for the federal government for 13 years. I've recently retired and am now a consultant. I'm also here, however, in another new capacity, and that is as the grandmother of a baby who last weekend turned 6 months and weighs 20 pounds on exclusive breastfeeding. And this has been, I mean, I know this is an anecdote, but it's been a new experience being on the consumer side and has given me lots of ideas. But my question is, in your presentation, sir, you did not mention bring your baby to work. And actually a couple of years ago at this summit, there was someone, I think, from some public agency in Nebraska who had the benefit of that policy. And I wondered what your views were on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, where, and I have to sort of put this out there in terms of saying where there are the facilities, where there is a high level of safety, right? I mean, is it all applicable for all workplaces? The reality is it is not, right? But certainly where it is applicable, you know, we need to be able to look at breaking down all the barriers. And part of it is, you know, first and foremost is how do you continue in terms of duration and exclusivity. Part of that is we rely on pumping as not the best way, but it's a compromise that says, okay, when those hours that I'm away from the infant, but certainly bringing the infant to mother is also certainly, you know, something that we would condone where appropriate. You know, what I didn't mention, but I want to re-stress here, is the sense that, you know, what you're doing, I mean, you're obviously an activist in this area. You're now a grandmother. But you're also very important as a supporter, right, for the mother. And what I didn't hit upon was the sense is that without support structures, and maybe that's the ultimate answer. You know, I mentioned the concept of empowered people, of people making the right decisions once they're given the information. But part of empowerment is not just giving that information. Part of empowerment are the people around you. It is the spouse and the spouse's support. It is mothers and mother-in-laws. That family unit, that family structure that says, hey, this is good, and I'm here to help you in whatever way. So the support structure, I think, is a key component of empowering. It's not just information. It's not just sort of getting into health literacy. It's the concept of support structures that empowers people as well, right? If we develop, once again, I mean, what we're up against is that whole breakdown in the 20th century of what wasn't necessarily shared was the sense of a lineage of this. You know, and I keep going back to smoking because, you know, we learned so much from smoking, and I use it for everything now because, again, it's not purely successful, but we've learned a lot. We've learned how to handle industries, right? We're at the stage now 50 years later where we call them thieves and liars and bad people, right? That the industry is no longer held up with some, or we're not held back with kid gloves anymore. We also know that changing social norms was part of it. You know, I always use the example. If I brought out a cigarette right now and started smoking in front of you, there would be gnashing of teeth, there would be turmoil in this room, and in a few hours there would be a former acting Surgeon General of the United States. But that's an example of the social norms. What we have to do is we have to restructure social norms so that breastfeeding is actually the acceptable component of this. And I think we're rounding the curve. But how is that also done? That's done from a mother and a grandmother and a grandfather telling their kids, this is what we did or didn't do, and this is what we regret not doing. So therefore, start up that new social norm, right? So that when you pass this on, this becomes, let's face it, this is the natural way. It is what, you know, what nature intended us to be doing.
Okay.
Michael Young, Howard University College of Medicine.
Can everybody hear her?
Okay. In previous iterations of Representative Maloney's laws, she had looked at pumps, breast pumps, and I think certainly with the Affordable Health Care Act allowing more equipment out there, we're back to the issue of an effective pump. Is there going to be any attempt to do regulation so that we don't have these products on the market that parents purchase that are absolutely worthless?
That's a question I can't speak to what we're going to do in the future, but I know that Congresswoman, as we continue to implement, as Dr. Leshniak said, all of the wellness provisions of the Affordable Care Act, making sure that medical devices and any kind of consumer products that are helping people stay well is going to be an important priority for both my boss and I think for Congress as a whole, to make sure, like you said, people that have been scammed by various, manufacturers are not shy about telling their representatives when they think that they've found a problem. So.
Isla Boyce, University of California, San Diego, and a member of the San Diego County Breastfeeding Coalition. And I'm very excited about the emphasis on workplace and mothers. And in fact, in San Diego, we've been giving out for over 25 years breastfeeding workplace friendly awards. However, I was the leader in that effort for several years, and I repeatedly was frustrated when I would try and get media attention, even though we would write press releases. SDCBC doesn't carry a lot of weight. And I guess I would like thoughts that you have, and one came to me when Dr. Christopher was talking, and again when you were talking, if there is any way we might get a stamp of approval from higher authorities, i.e. CDC, Public Health Service, or Kellogg Foundation, I mean, any way for us to attract attention. And I think, the Carl's Jr. piece is terrific. I love that. But just your thoughts of ways to help us in the trenches, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, and that's, it's a major issue not only for breastfeeding, but also for many other public health issues, is that, unless there's some major news to be shared, the media doesn't latch on to these public health stories. And I don't have an answer to that. I mean, to some extent, and again, from a personal example, I'll go back to our release of the 50th anniversary smoking report. What captivated me was that, being in this position, and it humbled me to the point of almost tears the morning of the release of our report. Our report was released on January 17th at the White House. The embargo on the press, and we had been spending 3-4 days doing interviews, doing tapings, doing media in all sorts of different realms. The morning of the release, the embargo had gone up, and it was fascinating because every headline didn't say anything about Boris Lushniak. And again, I have no ego after a quarter century in federal service, but it said Surgeon General says. Right, and it said Surgeon General talks about smoking, Surgeon General this, Surgeon General that. And that was, I think, what captivated. If it had been another report, even out of HHS, if it had been another report, even out of, other organizations, I'm not sure. There's something still about perhaps that branding that occurs with public health messaging. So it goes back into this whole idea is however we can support, right, whether it's, Public Health Service, whether it's the Surgeon General's office, many of your initiatives, we should have those types of discussions because that at least held traction for about 24 hours. And the press really will walk away from news rather quickly. I'm sure you see that, working for the Congresswoman, is that they latch on, and unless it's a scandal, right, unless it's something, a news story comes and goes. At the community level, it's that whole sense of, other groups have tried. You find your inspirational figure or you find your movie star who then becomes a spokesperson. That gets you a little bit of traction. But it's a difficult process to get the press involved. And they play such a key role in health communication for us. They really do.
Hi, thank you so much for your comments and reaffirming the Surgeon General's call to action. I'm Kathy Marinelli. I'm a neonatologist at Connecticut Children's Medical Center. I'm also on the board of ABM, and this year I'm the chair of the United States Breastfeeding Committee. So we're very active in what's going on in terms of here in the United States. And we just met the USBC board working on a strategic framework for the next 5 years here in the U.S., and it was eminently clear to us as we were discussing what we should do that no one needs to set out what needs to happen here in the U.S. because the Surgeon General did that. And those 20 action steps are really still quite obviously what needs to happen. And the question is how and who. And in talking about this and discussing it, it's really a matter of how we together should come together as groups, not as individuals anymore, and act together to try and work on those 20 steps and not stop trying to redefine things. But she really laid out the path for us. And having you reaffirm that here today, I think is really important for people to pay attention to, because it's there and it's still there and it still applies. So thank you for that.
Great, and thank you. And I have to, restate what I said earlier, is that, having the 20 steps, I think, is key. Having this delineation of responsibility is also key, right? Which is who does what and when do you do it. Ultimately, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's, an overused term, but in public health, it's more than appropriate to say it does take a village to be able to move these things. So, when you look back at this, even as let's talk about breastfeeding as a subset of the National Prevention Strategy, what can we say is that the National Prevention Strategy, if you look at the document that came out in June of 2011, the strategy itself, it delineates the multiple partnerships that need to exist just under the flag of general health and wellness and prevention. And what it says is the feds should be working on this, right? The state and local should be working on this. But then it gets down to such levels, and part of the level it gets to is, businesses, employers need to be doing this, right? Faith-based organizations need to be doing this. Community centers need to be doing this. It gets down to the family level. It gets down to the individual level. What is our own responsibility? And some people view this as, oh, you're just copping out here. You can't do it all, so therefore you put responsibility on everybody else's shoulders. No. I say I still have responsibility in this, but if we really are trying to achieve a lot of our public health goals, including the increase of breastfeeding in this nation, then it's going to take that extreme level of activism.
Yeah, well, if there are no other comments for our wonderful guest, thank you very much. You do very well in places.
Let me just finish up with an anecdote, because he'll kill me if I don't do this. But my chief of staff, Captain Robert DiMartino, wished he were here today. He's covering another meeting. And, we were discussing sort of approaches on this and what our messaging should be. And I really wanted him to come here to give us 5 minutes, because he, as the chief of staff to the Office of Surgeon General, a dedicated Public Health Service Commission Corps officer, was sharing with us, their own struggles in their family, right? They have 4 children. But it's the successful struggles, realizing there was barriers thrown in that, each of their 4 children were breastfed, and even their youngest is into 2 years now. And, he wanted to be here to basically say to you, it does take that support structure, right? He's not the one breastfeeding, but he's there supporting his wife. There are all the difficulties, but this is doable. Right, and he was almost beaming yesterday at this idea of be able to share his experiences. So I send greetings from the chief of staff as well, who has this very recent and successful personal story to tell.
Well, and I